Throughout the Second World War, there were many powerful men who led their countries into the conflict, and some were deposed, others died, but some leaders remained to oversee their nation until the very end. Political crises plagued certain nations, such as Britain, who saw a feeble prime minister be replaced with a more steely one, and in America, the president who brought the country into the war died, to be replaced by a man who okayed the dropping of the atomic bomb months into the job. But what about the wives of these World War II leaders? In this video we look at the women behind those men who dominated the global war, and this is a tale of heartbreak, death and suffering. One woman was even married for 40 hours to her longtime boyfriend, before her remains were left smouldering inside of a garden. Also there was another woman who knew her husband was having multiple affairs, but she continued to remain married to him, even when he was shot by partisans. So join us today as we look at what happened to the wives of the World War II leaders. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. The dictator of Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler, kept his long-standing girlfriend Eva Braun in the shadows. He wanted to portray an impression that he was single and was married to the Reich and to the political will of the Nazi Party. Eva Braun was a photographer's assistant when she met Hitler, and she was never involved in politics or government, and she was someone who loved and craved the attention of her boyfriend. She had large parties in the Berghof, Hitler's mountain retreat and home, and she was very dedicated to him. The German public did not know that Eva Braun had a relationship with Hitler, and some had no idea who she actually was. It's believed that the pair had a normal relationship behind closed doors, well as normal as it could be being the girlfriend to one of history's most evil dictators. But Eva Braun followed Hitler into the Führer bunker, his underground network of rooms and buildings under the Reich Chancellery inside of Berlin. She refused to leave despite being given the opportunity to do so, and instead for her loyalty, she married Hitler after midnight on the evening of the 28th of April 1945. The marriage would last around 40 hours. It was witnessed by propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels and private secretary Martin Bormann, and then a small wedding breakfast followed. Eva signed her name on the marriage certificate incorrectly, to begin with, before she changed her legal name to Eva Hitler. But then shortly after 1 p.m. on the 30th of April 1945, the couple said their goodbyes to the staff in the bunker and their friends. The situation in the war for the Nazis was dire, after the war was lost for them. Hitler had chosen his way out, and Eva Braun would follow her husband's actions. Inside of Hitler's study, at around 3:30 p.m. that afternoon, a gunshot was heard, and when Hitler's adjutant burst into the room, Eva Braun was found slumped to one side, having consumed cyanide. Her body was then taken out of the bunker's emergency exit, and was burned, being doused in huge amounts of fuel and petrol. Later, allegedly, parts of her teeth were discovered, as were a small amount of physical remains. Eva Braun was 33 years old when she died alongside her 56-year-old husband, the man who had brought about the Second World War. Joseph Stalin, the Soviet dictator, was actually married twice. His first marriage did not end well at all, and in heartbreak. He met Cato Sinadzwe in 1905 through her brother, and the pair hit it off. Stalin wasn't known by this name at the time, and he was actually a crook and a criminal. They married on the 16th of July 1906, and a small dinner then took place for 10 people. Stalin did not invite his mother to the wedding, neither did he tell her. At this time he was a bank robber, and was also known to the Imperial Secret Police. On the 18th of March 1907, Cato gave birth to Stalin's first son named Yakov. A few months after the birth, Stalin was involved in a high-value bank robbery, and the couple and child had to flee to Baku. But with Stalin away from home, he left Cato with the child, and she fell ill. She suffered with stress, and she did not want to abandon her husband. When she returned to her family, she drank some contaminated water, and on the 22nd of November 1907, she died from what is believed to have been typhoid. Stalin was heartbroken by the death of his first wife. His second wife, Nadezhda Alexeyeva, worked as a secretary for Bolshevik leaders, including Stalin at one point. She was an engineer too. Her family held many parties, and even helped to hide Vladimir Lenin in 1917, and Stalin had known her since she was a child, and he allegedly even saved her from drowning. After they saw each other once again, they fell in love and then married. Stalin was a 40-year-old widower at the time. One of Nadzieda's friends would state that the marriage was strained as the pair argued frequently, and these quarrels were witnessed by many of Stalin's personal security officers. It was said once that women didn't interest Stalin. His own woman was enough for him, and he paid scant attention to her, neglecting her. She spent her final days very depressed and suffering, and on the 9th of November 1932, alone in her room in Moscow, Alexeyeva shot herself with a small Mauser pistol. Stalin covered up her cause of death, saying she had in fact died from appendicitis. He never remarried after this. Franklin D. Roosevelt was the 32nd President of the United States. He served from 1933 until his death in 1945. He brought America into the Second World War, declaring war on the Japanese. Then the allies of Japan, including Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, declared war on the US. He worked with other Allied leaders closely, including Churchill and Stalin. His wife was Eleanor Roosevelt. She is remembered as the longest-serving First Lady of the United States, and she was a very powerful woman. She was outspoken and held regular press conferences, and sometimes even publicly disagreed with her husband's policies. She gave radio broadcasts trying to calm America's fears as they entered the war, and she even called upon women for their support for the president. She wrote a column called My Day, filled with information about the war effort. She travelled to Britain whilst the nation was struck by German enemy bomber planes. She saw firsthand what was happening in England and how the women were aiding the war effort. Eleanor Roosevelt wrote, "These British Isles, which we always regarded as class-conscious, as a place where people were nearly frozen in their closely knit communities, in which many of the old distinctions lost their point and from which new values emerged." She took other dangerous trips to different countries and was rather brave. Her husband died on the 12th of April 1945 and she was made a widow, but she learned that her husband's mistress had been with her husband when he died, and she also learned that her daughter had known about the relationship. She continued to campaign for different causes after the Second World War and died at the age of 78 in 1962. The man who was sworn in as President of the United States following Roosevelt's death was Harry S. Truman, the Vice President. As 1945 came around, with the end of the Second World War in sight, Roosevelt's death threatened to destabilise the Allied war effort. Truman had little preparation for the huge responsibilities he faced, and he was the man who authorised the use of the atomic bomb against the Japanese, and he was involved in the plans for the post-war world. Truman's wife was Bess Wallace, and as First Lady she avoided media attention, unlike Roosevelt's wife, and she chose not to continue the regular press conferences. She did get involved in official duties, for example christening planes and being present for her husband when required. Each day she was sent 100 letters, and she took time to reply to as many of these as she could. Her influence on her husband was done in private. Following her tenure as First Lady, Bess Truman lived in retirement in her home until her death in 1982. She was a popular woman, but was devoted to her privacy, and she refused to share any information about herself to journalists. King George VI came onto the throne rather accidentally after his brother gave up the crown. His wife is mostly known as Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. During the war, the royal family were symbols of defiance against fascism. Elizabeth broadcast to the nation to comfort families during evacuations of children, and she refused publicly to leave London or to send her children to Canada, even during the Blitz. She said, "The children won't go without me, and I won't leave the king, and the king will never leave." She even went with her husband to visit bomb-damaged sites, including the East End. She wore expensive clothes to this, and some jeered at her, as they thought this was in bad taste, but she later helped to represent hope, especially as Buckingham Palace was hit by the bombs. She famously said, "It makes me feel I can look the East End in the face." The royal couple worked at Buckingham Palace and stayed the night at Windsor. Hitler even referred to her as the most dangerous woman in Europe because of her popularity. Her husband George VI died unexpectedly, and she then became more formally known as the Queen Mother, as her daughter Elizabeth became Queen Elizabeth II. She was devastated by her husband's death. It was Winston Churchill who convinced her to resume public duties. She lived past her 100th birthday and died on the 30th of March 2002 at the age of 101. He was the British wartime Prime Minister who is remembered for being one of the greatest British figures in history. Winston Churchill stared directly into the abyss of the Nazi dominance and was the man whose dedication to defeating tyranny led Britain to be victorious in the Second World War. His wife was Clementine, and the pair met in 1904, and they began their 56-year marriage in 1908. Together the pair had 5 children, and during the First World War, Clementine organised canteens for munition workers, and during World War II she was the chairman of the Red Cross Aid to Russia Fund, and the president of the Young Women's Christian Association Wartime Appeal. She was also the chairperson of the maternity hospital for the wives of officers. She helped her husband to edit and rehearse his speeches. She was incredibly loyal to her husband, and during the war, she was actually awarded the Order of the Red Banner by the Soviets. In 1946, she was appointed Dame Grand Cross of the Order of the British Empire, becoming Dame Clementine Churchill. Her husband died on the 24th of January 1965, and she was left a widow, and was created a life peer in the House of Lords. Lady Spencer Churchill, as she was known, died of a heart attack in December 1977 at the age of 92, and she had outlived her husband by 12 years, and even outlived 3 of her children. The man who Churchill replaced, and a man seen as a failed appeaser, was Neville Chamberlain. He took Britain into the war, but within a year of doing that, was ousted from the position of Prime Minister. His big ideas all failed, and he was someone who failed to stand up to Hitler. Chamberlain did make the declaration of war on Nazi Germany. His wife was Anne de Vere Cole, and the pair married in 1911. He was a businessman at the time, before she encouraged his entry into politics. They had a lot of common interests, but her husband died of bowel cancer on the 9th of November 1940. Anne Chamberlain lived for over 26 years after, and died in Belgravia, in London. Benito Mussolini, the Italian fascist dictator, was known for his love of women. Throughout his life he had many mistresses, and was even shot next to one of them instead of his wife. Like Stalin, Mussolini was married twice. His first wife, Ida Dolsa, gave birth to a son named after Mussolini, but this marriage lasted roughly a year. She seemed to finance whatever Mussolini wanted to do, and later fascist agents tried to erase all traces of this marriage. Mussolini had her later, following his seizure of power, placed under surveillance. Ida Dolsa was then sent off to a mental hospital, and she died there under very strange circumstances. After his divorce from Dolsa, he married Rachele Mussolini. Lady Rachel, as she was known, is believed was a stern woman and an authoritarian one, and she may have even dominated her husband. She even wanted her son-in-law executed during the war, and relations with her daughter Edda, who was referred to as the real dictator of the house, were not good. She had 5 children with Mussolini, but her husband was executed in 1945 alongside his mistress Clara Patasci. Rachele seemed to turn a blind eye to what her husband was doing. She died in October 1979 at the age of 89 in Italy, almost 35 years after her husband was gunned down near to Lake Como. A man considered a mythical figure, almost to the Japanese, Emperor Hirohito was one of the longest reigning monarchs in history. He oversaw the rise of Japanese militarism and expansionism in Asia, as well as their involvement in the Second Sino-Japanese War and the Second World War. His wife was Princess Nagako, later referred to as Empress Kurjin. She was a princess to one of the branches of the Imperial House of Japan, and was a princess by birth. She was a distant cousin to Emperor Hirohito, whom she later married, and they had matched at a young age. She became the Crown Princess of Japan, and later Empress of Japan, when Hirohito came onto the throne in December 1929. He abandoned his concubines at court, and Empress Nagako gave birth to 4 daughters. Her husband stayed faithful to her, even when his wife did not produce a son. But they did then have a son and heir in December 1933, this being the later Emperor Akihito. She performed her ceremonial duties alongside her husband, and during World War II was confined to the palace grounds, and her duties involved looking after wounded generals. She wrote to families who lost their loved ones. She described the Second World War as the hardest time of my life, and she regularly saw her husband in deep states of stress. During the occupation of Japan, Nagako took English lessons and toured the country to meet orphans and families. She was the first empress, consort to travel overseas and accompanied her husband on visits to Europe and the US. She also cared for him in his final years. Their marriage lasted almost 65 years. After a fall, she was confined to a wheelchair, and following her husband's death in early 1989, she became an Empress Dowager. She died in the year 2000 at the age of 97. So during the Second World War, the wives of many of the leaders had an important and pivotal role, not just in supporting their husbands, but in reaching out to those who were struggling and suffering. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.